The year is 1066. A cold winter grips the land of England. The old king, Edward the Confessor, lies dying in his new palace at Westminster. He has ruled for over 2 decades, but he has failed in one crucial duty. He has failed to produce an heir. This single failure has cast a long dark shadow over the kingdom. Who would wear the crown of England? Who would command its armies and protect its shores? Even before King Edward the Confessor was laid to rest in his newly consecrated Westminster Abbey, the Witan, England's council of great men, acted with decisive speed. A power vacuum was an invitation for invasion. They proclaimed Harold Godwinson, Earl of Wessex, as the new King of England. The coronation was held the very next day, a move to present a united front. Harold was the natural choice. An Englishman, born and bred, he was the most powerful noble in the kingdom, a proven military commander who had effectively governed England for years as the king's right-hand man. He knew the land and the people and had the backing of the English aristocracy. His claim was simple and powerful. He was chosen by the council and, according to English sources, nominated by Edward himself on his deathbed. Across the English Channel in his formidable Duchy of Normandy, Duke William heard the news with cold fury. Known as William the Bastard due to his illegitimate birth, he had spent his life fighting to secure his own inheritance, forging him into a ruthless and brilliant military strategist. William's claim was based on a promise he said King Edward had made years earlier. More damningly, he declared that Harold Godwinson himself had sworn a sacred oath over holy relics to support William's succession. In William's eyes, Harold was now a perjurer, a man who had broken a holy vow. He was a master of the modern art of war, combining heavy cavalry, disciplined infantry and archers into a devastating fighting force. He was a pioneer of castle building, a skill he now planned to unleash on England to secure the crown he believed was his by right. And from the frozen north, a third contender watched the unfolding drama. He was Harold Sigurdsson, King of Norway, better known as Hardrada, the Hard Ruler, a giant of a man and a living legend. Hardrada was the last of the great Viking kings. His life was an epic saga of adventure. Exiled from Norway, he commanded the elite Varangian Guard in Constantinople, amassing a vast fortune and a fearsome reputation. Having fought his way back to the Norwegian throne, he now saw England's crisis as his final opportunity. His claim was based on a shaky, generation-old agreement, but it was bolstered by a powerful new ally, Tostig Godwinson, Harold's own exiled and vengeful brother. Together they planned to resurrect the great North Sea Empire of King Knut, and Hardrada, a warrior who had never known defeat, believed destiny was on his side. For months, Harold kept his army mobilized along the southern coast, waiting for Norman sails to appear on the horizon. This long wait was a trial in itself. Keeping a medieval army in the field was incredibly difficult. Provisions were running low, and morale was beginning to fray. As summer turned to autumn, the men of the Fjord needed to return home for the harvest. By early September, Harold was forced to disband the Fjord and send the men home. It was a calculated risk born of necessity, but it was a gamble that would have devastating consequences. Harold Hardrada arrived with around 300 longships packed with thousands of Viking warriors, one of the largest invasion forces ever seen. Hardrada and his ally Tostig sailed up the River Ouse and landed just south of York. At Gate Fulford on September 20th, veteran Norse warriors smashed the inexperienced Saxon forces. King Harold in London heard the news and responded instantly, gathering his forces for a desperate march north. They covered 185 miles in 4 days, an army moving with desperate urgency. On September 25th, Harold's exhausted but determined force arrived at Stamford Bridge, surprising the Norwegians. The first great battle for the crown of 1066 began. Harold's surprise attack shattered the Norwegian army in a brutal day-long battle. Both Harold Hardrada and Tostig Godwinson were killed. The Viking threat was utterly annihilated. Of the 300 ships that brought the invasion force, only 24 were needed to carry the survivors home. It was one of the greatest victories in English history. But as Harold celebrated his triumph, a messenger arrived with devastating news. William of Normandy had landed at Pevensey. The celebration was cut brutally short. Harold had to turn his battered army around and march another 250 miles to face a fresh Norman force. William landed unopposed at Pevensey Bay. with 7,000 men and 2,000 horses, then moved to Hastings, where he built a wooden castle. He began a deliberate campaign of terror, burning villages and farms in Harold's personal earldom. This was not random violence, but calculated strategy. William was goading Harold into battle. Against advice to wait for reinforcements, Harold chose to act. He would not stand by while his people suffered. On the evening of October 13th, Harold's army took up a formidable defensive position on Senlac Hill, 6 miles northwest of Hastings. The two armies camped for the night, separated by a shallow valley. The next morning would be the day of destiny. As the sun rose on October 14th, 1066, the fate of England rested on a single ridge. On this high ground, King Harold Godwinson's army stood ready. They formed their famous shield wall, an interlocking barrier of wood, leather and steel that had proven nearly unbreakable for generations. In the front ranks stood the elite housecarls, professional soldiers bound by oath to their king, wielding terrifying long-handled Danish axes capable of cleaving through a knight and his horse with a single blow. Behind them, the third, a militia of free Englishmen, bolstered the line with spears and swords. Harold had chosen his ground perfectly. William's army would have to attack uphill, a grueling, exhausting prospect against such a formidable defense. At 9 in the morning, the battle began with the blare of Norman trumpets. William, a master of combined arms tactics, opened with a barrage from his archers, hoping to weaken and disorganize the English line before the main assault. But the steepness of the hill worked against them. The arrows either lost their momentum and fell short, thudding harmlessly into the wall of shields, or flew completely over the heads of the English soldiers. Undeterred, William sent his infantry surging uphill. They crashed against the shield wall with a deafening roar of steel on steel and wood. But the disciplined English line held firm, repelling the attack with a hedge of spears and brutal axe work. Next, William unleashed his trump card, the Norman cavalry. These armoured knights were the shock troops of their age, a force that had dominated battlefields across Europe. They thundered up the slope, lances levelled, aiming to punch through the English line with sheer force, but the charge lost vital momentum on the steep incline. The horses, already tired, shied away from the solid wall of shields, the forest of spear points, and the terrifying swing of the great axes. The charge faltered and broke, with knights and horses cut down by the resolute housecarls. For hours the battle raged in a bloody stalemate. With his conventional tactics failing, William turned to cunning. He ordered a feigned retreat, a risky maneuver that required immense discipline. Seeing the Normans apparently fleeing, some of the less experienced English ferdmen, perhaps overconfident and eager for glory, broke ranks against Harold's orders. They charged down the hill in a disorganized pursuit. It was a fatal error. The Norman cavalry wheeled around, trapping the pursuers on open ground away from the protection of the shield wall. The hunters became the hunted, surrounded and slaughtered. Time and again, William exploited this English indiscipline, slowly and deliberately chipping away at the strength of Harold's army. As the day wore on, both armies were nearing exhaustion. William ordered his archers to try a new tactic, to fire high into the air, letting the arrows rain down on the English from above, bypassing the shield wall. During one such high-arcing barrage, legend tells us a stray arrow plunged from the sky and struck King Harold in the eye. Mortally wounded, the King of England fell. Seeing their king fall, a wave of despair swept through the English ranks. The heart of their resistance was gone. Seizing the moment, William ordered one final, massive assault. The Normans crashed into a wavering, demoralized line. The loyal housecarls fought to the death around their fallen king's body, but it was not enough. The final assault smashed the wavering line. The shield wall was broken. Anglo-Saxon England had died with its king. The death of Harold was a mortal blow to Anglo-Saxon England, but resistance didn't die with him, it crumbled. In the power vacuum, William began a great looping march of intimidation around London. Faced with this relentless advance, the remaining English leaders, including the young claimant Edgar Atheling, lost their nerve. At Berkhamsted they submitted, offering William the crown he had crossed the Channel to claim. The symbolism was potent. On Christmas Day, 1066, William was crowned in Westminster Abbey, the sacred church of Edward the Confessor, to legitimize his claim. The ceremony was tense. When the Archbishop asked the English if they accepted William, their roar of affirmation was mistaken by Norman guards outside for treachery. They panicked, setting fire to nearby houses. The coronation concluded amidst the smoke of a burning London. a dark omen for the conquest to come. William's crown was not secure. Rebellions flared, especially in the north. His response was the merciless harrying of the north, a scorched earth campaign that left the region devastated. To cement his rule, he initiated a revolutionary castle-building program. Initially, moat and bailey forts, wooden towers on earthen mounds, they were rapidly built to dominate the landscape. They were garrisons, administrative hubs, and a constant, visible reminder to the English that they were a conquered people. The conquest triggered a social revolution. The Anglo-Saxon ruling class was dispossessed, their lands given to William's followers. This created a stark linguistic divide. For 300 years, Norman French was the language of the court, law and power, while English became the tongue of the peasantry. To tax his new kingdom, William commissioned the Domesday Book, an unprecedented inventory of England's wealth. It was the ultimate act of a new master taking stock of his prize. Yet from this division a new identity was forged. Through intermarriage and time, the lines between Norman and English blurred. The English language survived but was profoundly changed, absorbing thousands of French words for law, food and culture, creating the rich language we speak today. The Battle of Hastings was more than a change of king, it was the violent birth of a new nation. The Anglo-Saxon world perished on that hillside, but from its ashes rose a hybrid nation whose destiny would shape the modern world.